Sarah Martinez woke up in her small London hotel room with butterflies dancing in her stomach. Today was the day she had been dreaming about for months. She had saved every penny from her part-time job at a coffee shop in Los Angeles to make this trip happen. The 28-year-old woman had always been fascinated by royal culture and British traditions. Her Instagram account was filled with photos of castles, crowns, and anything related to royalty. She jumped out of bed and rushed to the window. The morning sun was painting the London sky in beautiful shades of gold and pink. Perfect weather for her big day at Buckingham Palace. Sarah had planned everything down to the smallest detail. She had researched the best times to visit, the best spots for photos, and even practiced different poses in front of her hotel mirror. Sarah grabbed her phone and started getting ready. She chose her outfit carefully. A bright red dress that would stand out in photos, comfortable shoes for walking, and a small backpack with extra batteries for her phone. She had learned from other travel bloggers that you always need backup power when creating content all day long. While brushing her teeth, Sarah checked her social media accounts. Her followers had been asking for weeks when she would post her London content. She had promised them something special, something that would make them feel like they were right there with her. The pressure was building, but Sarah loved the challenge. She ate a quick breakfast at the hotel restaurant while scrolling through other influencers' posts from London. Everyone seemed to get the same basic shots of Big Ben and Tower Bridge. Sarah wanted something different, something that would make her stand out from the crowd. She had seen some photos of tourists posing with the famous Queen's Guards, and that gave her an idea. The subway ride to Buckingham Palace was filled with excitement. Sarah kept checking her camera settings and making sure everything was perfect. She had watched YouTube videos about the changing of the guard ceremony and knew it happened at specific times. She also knew that thousands of other tourists would be there, all trying to get the same photos. When Sarah stepped out of the subway station, she could already hear the buzz of excited voices speaking in different languages. Tourists from all over the world were walking in the same direction, all heading toward the same destination. Street vendors were selling British flag souvenirs and postcards of the royal family. As Sarah approached Buckingham Palace, her heart started beating faster. The massive building looked even more impressive in person than in all the photos she had seen online. The golden gates sparkled in the morning sunlight, and she could see tourists already gathering along the fence, claiming their spots for the ceremony. Sarah pushed through the growing crowd, trying to find the perfect position. Everyone seemed to have the same idea as her. People were holding up phones and cameras, blocking the view for others behind them. Some tourists had arrived very early and were sitting on small folding chairs they had brought from their hotels. She noticed that the crowd was getting thicker by the minute. Families with children, elderly couples with professional cameras, and young backpackers like herself were all competing for the best viewing spots. Sarah realized that getting a good photo was going to be much harder than she had expected. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation. People were chatting excitedly about what they hoped to see and sharing stories about their travels. Sarah heard conversations in Spanish, French, German, and languages she could not identify. Everyone seemed to be having a wonderful time, but Sarah was starting to feel stressed. She looked at her phone and saw that she still had about 30 minutes before the ceremony would begin. The crowd was already so thick that she could barely see over the heads of the people in front of her. Sarah started to panic a little bit. She had come all this way and spent all this money for content that might not be any better than what thousands of other tourists were creating at the exact same moment. That was when Sarah noticed something interesting. She watched the pattern of how the guards moved during their regular patrols. They always walked in perfectly straight lines, never varying their path even slightly. An idea began forming in her mind, an idea that would soon change everything about her perfect day in London. Lance Corporal James Wellington opened his eyes at exactly 5:30 in the morning without needing an alarm clock. After 3 years of military service, his body had learned to wake up at the same time every single day. The 25-year-old soldier had developed a morning routine that never changed, not even on weekends or holidays. James lived in the military barracks near Wellington Barracks, just a short walk from Buckingham Palace. His small room was perfectly organized with military precision. His bed was made with hospital corners so tight that you could bounce a coin off the blanket. His uniforms hung in perfect order, and his boots were polished to a mirror shine. The young man from Yorkshire had joined the British Army straight out of school. He had always dreamed of serving his country, but he never imagined he would become one of the famous Queen's Guards that tourists traveled from around the world to see. When he first got the assignment, James thought it would be easy. He quickly learned that being a ceremonial guard was one of the most challenging jobs in the military. James started his morning with 50 push-ups and 50 sit-ups. Physical fitness was crucial for a Queen's Guard because the uniform was incredibly heavy. The red tunic weighed several pounds, and the famous bearskin hat added even more weight. Guards had to stand perfectly still for hours at a time, and weak soldiers simply could not handle the physical demands. After his workout, James took a cold shower. The cold water helped him stay alert and focus for the long day ahead. He had learned this trick from older guards who had been doing the job for many years. They taught him that mental toughness was just as important as physical strength. The most important part of James's morning routine was putting on his uniform. Every piece had to be perfect because millions of people would see him throughout the day. He started with his red tunic, making sure every button was properly fastened and every piece of gold trim was straight. The uniform had been worn by dozens of guards before him, and James felt the weight of that history every time he put it on. Next came the white belt that crossed his chest. James checked it 3 times to make sure it was positioned exactly right. Even the smallest detail mattered because the Queen's Guards represented the best of British military tradition. Any mistake in his appearance would reflect poorly on the entire regiment. The bearskin hat was the final and most important piece. James had to be very careful when putting it on because the hat was made from real bear fur and was extremely valuable. The hat had been passed down through generations of guards, and some of them were over 100 years old. James always felt a sense of pride and responsibility when he placed the famous hat on his head. Before leaving his room, James looked at himself in the mirror one final time. He checked his posture, his facial expression, and every detail of his uniform. The face looking back at him showed no emotion whatsoever. This blank expression was something he had practiced for months until it became natural. James had been taught that a Queen's Guard must never show emotion while on duty. Tourists would try everything to make him smile, laugh, or react in some way. Children would make funny faces at him. Adults would tell jokes or try to touch his uniform. Some people even tried to take selfies with him without permission. But James never broke character. He had been trained to think of himself as a living statue, a symbol of British strength and discipline. His job was to protect the royal family and maintain the traditions that had been followed for hundreds of years. As James walked through the barracks toward his post, he thought about the day ahead. He knew that thousands of tourists would be watching him, taking photos, and expecting him to be perfect. He also knew that some of those tourists would not understand the seriousness of his duty. Today, like every other day, he was ready to face whatever challenges came his way. The clock tower nearby chimed 10 o'clock, and Sarah could feel her anxiety growing stronger with each passing minute. The crowd around Buckingham Palace had grown so thick that she could barely move. People were packed together like sardines in a can, all trying to get the perfect view of the upcoming ceremony. Sarah looked around desperately, trying to find any opening that might give her a better position. She watched as other tourists seemed to have claimed the best spots hours earlier. Some had even brought small ladders and step stools to see over the heads of people in front of them. Others had professional cameras with long lenses that could capture details from far away. A family from Germany was standing right in front of Sarah, and their teenage son was holding up a tablet to record everything. The large screen was completely blocking her view. Behind her, a group of elderly tourists from Japan were chatting excitedly and taking photos of each other with the palace in the background. Everyone seemed to be having a wonderful time except for Sarah. She pulled out her phone and started taking some basic photos of the crowd and the palace, but they looked exactly like thousands of other tourist photos she had seen online. There was nothing special or unique about them. Sarah knew that her followers expected something different, something that would make them stop scrolling and pay attention. That was when Sarah started studying the movements of the guards more carefully. She noticed that they had very specific patterns and routes that they followed. During their regular patrols, the guards always walked in perfectly straight lines from one post to another. They never stepped aside for tourists or changed their path for any reason. Sarah watched as a guard walked from the palace entrance toward the main gate. His pace was steady and measured, like a human metronome. His face showed absolutely no expression, and he looked straight ahead without acknowledging any of the tourists who were waving at him and trying to get his attention. An idea began forming in Sarah's mind. She realized that if she could position herself in the path of one of these guards, she would be able to get an incredible close-up video. The guard would have to walk right past her, maybe even interact with her in some way. It would be the kind of unique content that would make her video go viral. Sarah started moving through the crowd, trying to get closer to the area where the guards walked. She squeezed between families and apologized as she accidentally bumped into other tourists. Some people gave her annoyed looks, but Sarah was too focused on her mission to care about their reactions. She found a spot near the rope barriers that separated the tourists from the ceremonial areas. From this position, Sarah could see the exact path that the guards used when they marched from one location to another. The path was marked by worn stones in the pavement where hundreds of guards had walked the same route for many years. Sarah checked her phone battery and made sure her camera was set to record in high definition. She practiced holding the phone at different angles to see which position would capture the best footage. She even rehearsed what she might say if she decided to narrate the video while recording. The excitement in the crowd was building as more guards appeared in the distance. Sarah could hear people around her talking about the ceremony that was about to begin. Children were asking their parents questions about the guards' uniforms and weapons. Tour guides were explaining the history of the changing of the guard tradition to their groups. But Sarah was not listening to any of this. Her entire focus was on timing her move perfectly. She studied the rhythm of the guard steps and calculated how long it would take them to reach her position. She planned to step into their path at the last possible moment, get her video, and then step back into the crowd before anyone could stop her. Sarah had no idea that what she was planning would break one of the most important rules of royal protocol. The moment Sarah had been waiting for finally arrived. She could see Lance Corporal Wellington and 3 other guards marching in perfect formation toward her section of the crowd. Their red uniforms looked magnificent in the morning sunlight, and their tall bearskin hats made them appear even more impressive and intimidating. The sound of their boots hitting the pavement created a rhythmic beat that echoed off the palace walls. Each step was perfectly timed with the others, creating a sound that had been heard at Buckingham Palace for hundreds of years. The guards' faces showed no emotion whatsoever, and they looked straight ahead, as if the crowd of tourists did not exist at all. Sarah's heart was pounding so hard that she could hear it in her ears. She gripped her phone tightly and got ready to make her move. The guards were now only about 50 feet away from her position. She could see every detail of their uniforms, from the gold buttons on their red tunics to the white plumes on their bearskin hats. The crowd around Sarah was getting more and more excited as the guards approached. People were holding up cameras and phones, trying to capture the perfect shot. Children were pointing and asking their parents questions about the soldiers. Some tourists were even applauding as if they were watching a performance rather than a serious military ceremony. When the guards were about 20 feet away, Sarah made her decision. She took a deep breath and ducked under the rope barrier that separated the tourists from the ceremonial area. Several people in the crowd gasped when they saw what she was doing. A few tourists tried to grab her arm to stop her, but Sarah was too quick for them. Sarah stepped directly into the path of the marching guards and raised her phone to start recording. She had a huge smile on her face as she began filming herself with the approaching soldiers in the background. For a brief moment, Sarah felt like she had achieved exactly what she wanted. She was getting the unique content that would make her different from every other tourist. The crowd's reaction was immediate and intense. Some people started shouting warnings to Sarah, telling her to get out of the way. Others were laughing and pointing, thinking that what she was doing was funny. A few tourists started recording the scene with their own phones, realizing that they were about to witness something unusual. Tour guides in the crowd began shaking their heads and explaining to their groups that what Sarah was doing was not allowed. Some of the more experienced London tourists knew that interfering with the Queen's guards was a serious mistake. They had seen similar situations before and knew that the guards would not simply stop or walk around an obstacle. But Sarah was not paying attention to any of the warnings or reactions from the crowd. She was completely focused on her phone screen, watching herself record what she thought would be an amazing video. She could see the guards getting closer and closer in the background of her recording, and she was thrilled with how dramatic it looked. As the guards continued their march toward her, Sarah finally looked up from her phone screen. That was when she realized that something was very wrong. The guards were not slowing down. They were not changing direction. They were not showing any sign that they planned to walk around her. Lance Corporal Wellington's expression had not changed at all. His face was still completely blank, showing no emotion or reaction to the tourist blocking his path. His eyes were focused straight ahead, and he continued marching at exactly the same pace as before. The other guards behind him were also maintaining their formation and rhythm. Sarah's smile began to fade as she realized that the guards were not going to stop for her. She had expected them to pause or at least acknowledge her presence, but they were acting as if she was invisible. The rhythmic sound of their boots on the pavement continued without any change in tempo. For the first time since stepping into their path, Sarah began to understand that she might have made a serious mistake. The guards were now less than 10 feet away from her, and they showed no signs of breaking their formation. The crowd's shouting was getting louder, but Sarah felt frozen in place, not sure what she should do next. Lance Corporal Wellington had dealt with situations like this many times before during his 3 years as a Queen's Guard. Tourists often did not understand the seriousness of the ceremonial duties or the importance of maintaining military discipline. Some visitors thought the guards were just actors in costumes, put there for entertainment and photo opportunities. But James Wellington was a real soldier with real training and real responsibilities. He had sworn an oath to protect the crown and uphold the traditions of the British military. No tourist, no matter how confused or determined, was going to make him break that oath or abandon his duty. As he continued marching towards Sarah, Wellington's mind went through his training. He had been taught that the ceremonial march was sacred and represented centuries of British military history. Every step he took followed in the footsteps of thousands of guards who had walked the same path before him. Breaking formation or changing course would dishonor all of those who had served before him. The Queen's Guards had a simple but important rule that every soldier learned during training. The rule was never to break formation, never to stop marching, and never to let anything interfere with their ceremonial duties. This rule existed for good reasons. If guards started making exceptions for tourists, the ceremonies would lose their meaning and dignity. Wellington could see that the young woman in his path was holding a phone and appeared to be recording herself. This made the situation even more serious because it meant she was deliberately interfering with his duties for personal gain. She was not just a confused tourist who had accidentally wandered into the wrong area. She was intentionally blocking his path to create social media content. The other guards marching behind Wellington maintained their formation and continued at the same steady pace. They trusted their leader to handle the situation appropriately while they focused on their own responsibilities. This kind of teamwork and discipline was what made the Queen's Guards famous around the world. As Wellington got closer to Sarah, he prepared to give the traditional warning that Queen's Guards use when their path is blocked. This warning had been used for generations and was part of the official protocol for dealing with interference during ceremonies. The warning was not meant to be polite or friendly. It was meant to be authoritative and commanding. Wellington's voice suddenly boomed across the courtyard with a power that surprised even the most experienced tourists in the crowd. His deep, military-trained voice cut through all the noise and chatter like a sharp knife through butter. The single word he shouted was clear, loud, and impossible to ignore. "Make way." The command echoed off the palace walls and seemed to hang in the air for several seconds. Every conversation in the crowd stopped immediately. Children stopped asking questions. Adults stopped taking photos. Even the street vendors selling souvenirs nearby paused their sales pitches to listen. Sarah felt the power of that voice hit her like a physical force. She had never heard anything so commanding and authoritative in her entire life. The sound made her realize that she was not dealing with a tourist attraction or a performer. She was facing a real soldier who was trained to command respect and obedience. But even after hearing the warning, Sarah remained frozen in place. Part of her brain was telling her to move immediately, but another part was still focused on getting her video. She was also shocked by how serious the situation had become and was not sure what she should do next. Wellington continued marching without slowing down or changing direction. His training had taught him that giving the warning was enough. If people chose not to respond to the warning, then they would face the consequences of their decision. The Queen's guards could not be responsible for people who ignored clear commands and interfered with official duties. The crowd was now completely silent except for the rhythmic sound of the guards' boots on the pavement. Everyone could sense that something significant was about to happen. Some tourists started backing away from the area, realizing that they did not want to be too close to whatever was coming next. Sarah finally understood that she was in real trouble, but by then it was too late for her to move out of the way safely. What happened next became one of those moments that people would talk about for years to come. Lance Corporal Wellington reached Sarah's position while maintaining his perfect military stride. His training had prepared him for exactly this situation, and he knew precisely what he needed to do. Without breaking his rhythm or changing his facial expression, Wellington used his shoulder to firmly but safely move Sarah out of his path. The movement was controlled and professional, designed to clear the obstacle without causing unnecessary harm. It was not violent or angry, but it was definitely forceful enough to make his point clear. Sarah felt the impact like running into a moving wall. The guard's shoulder connected with her side and sent her stumbling sideways into the crowd of tourists who were watching the scene unfold. Her carefully planned video recording turned into chaos as her phone spun through the air, capturing nothing but blurry images of the sky and confused faces. The crowd's reaction was immediate and explosive. Some people gasped in shock, while others cheered and applauded Wellington for doing his duty. A few tourists rushed forward to help Sarah regain her balance, while others continued recording the scene with their own phones and cameras. Sarah's phone landed on the pavement several feet away from where she ended up. The screen was cracked, but the device was still recording. All she had captured was a few seconds of shaky footage before the collision, followed by spinning images that made no sense at all. Meanwhile, Lance Corporal Wellington and his fellow guards continued their march as if absolutely nothing had happened. Their faces remained completely emotionless, and their step never faltered for even a moment. They marched in perfect formation toward their destination, leaving behind a crowd of excited and amazed tourists. The professionalism displayed by the guards was remarkable. They had dealt with the interference quickly and effectively while maintaining the dignity and seriousness of their ceremonial duties. Not one of them looked back or showed any sign that they were even aware of what had just occurred. Sarah stood in the crowd, her face burning with embarrassment as she realized what had just happened. Her red dress was wrinkled, her hair was messy, and her confidence was completely shattered. The other tourists around her were buzzing with excitement about what they had witnessed, and many of them were looking at her with expressions of amusement or sympathy. A kind elderly woman from Scotland offered Sarah a tissue and asked if she was hurt. A young couple from Australia told her that they had gotten the whole thing on video and asked if she wanted to see it. Several other tourists shared their own stories about times they had seen guards deal with difficult situations. But Sarah was not really listening to any of them. She was focused on retrieving her damaged phone and trying to figure out what had gone wrong with her perfect plan. The video she had wanted to create was ruined, and instead of being the person behind the camera, she had become the subject of everyone else's recordings. As Sarah picked up her cracked phone, she noticed that dozens of other tourists were still recording her with their own devices. She realized that her embarrassing encounter was being captured from multiple angles by people she had never met. The thought of all those videos being shared online made her feel sick to her stomach. The ceremony continued around her as if nothing unusual had happened. The guards reached their destination and took their positions for the changing of the guard ritual. The crowd's attention gradually shifted away from Sarah's incident and back to the official proceedings. But Sarah could not focus on the ceremony anymore. She kept replaying the moment of impact in her mind, wondering how she could have been so wrong about what would happen. She had expected the guards to be understanding, or at least polite, but instead she had learned a harsh lesson about military discipline and royal protocol. The worst part was realizing that her attempt to create unique content had backfired completely. Instead of making something special for her social media accounts, she had created an embarrassing situation that other people were now turning into their own content. Sarah was no longer the creator of the story. She had become the story itself. Standing there in the crowd with her broken phone and wounded pride, Sarah began to understand that her adventure in London was not going to end the way she had hoped. Sarah's face turned bright red as the full weight of her embarrassment settled in. She could feel hundreds of eyes staring at her from every direction. The tourists who had witnessed her encounter with Lance Corporal Wellington were still buzzing with excitement, and many of them were pointing at her while discussing what they had just seen. Some people in the crowd were sympathetic and tried to comfort her. A family from Canada asked if she was okay and offered to help her find a place to sit down. An older gentleman from Wales told her that everyone makes mistakes when traveling and that she should not feel too bad about what happened. But other tourists were clearly entertained by Sarah's misfortune. She could hear people giggling and making jokes about the incident. A group of college students from France were imitating the way she had stumbled when the guard moved her out of his path. Their laughter made Sarah want to disappear into the ground. The most embarrassing part was seeing all the phones and cameras that were still pointed in her direction. Sarah realized that her mistake had been recorded by dozens of people from multiple angles. She could imagine those videos being shared on social media platforms within hours, maybe even minutes. Sarah tried to check her own phone to see if any of her footage was salvageable, but the cracked screen made it difficult to see clearly. What little she could make out looked terrible. The video was shaky and unclear, and it ended abruptly when her phone went flying during the collision. A teenage boy approached Sarah and showed her his phone screen. He had recorded the entire incident from beginning to end, including her stepping into the guard's path and the moment when Wellington moved her aside. The video was crystal clear and captured every embarrassing detail of what had happened. The boy asked Sarah if she wanted him to send her a copy of the video, thinking he was being helpful. But seeing herself on his phone screen made Sarah feel even worse. She looked foolish and unprepared, nothing like the confident social media influencer she tried to present online. Sarah politely declined the boy's offer and tried to move away from the crowd, but people kept approaching her with questions and comments. Some wanted to know if she was a professional blogger or journalist. Others asked if she had gotten permission to interfere with the ceremony. A tour guide who had been leading a group from Germany came over to explain the situation to Sarah. She told her that the Queen's Guards take their duties very seriously and that tourists are never supposed to interfere with their ceremonies. The guide explained that the guards are real soldiers, not actors, and that their job is to protect the royal family and maintain important traditions. Sarah listened to the explanation while feeling increasingly stupid about her actions. She realized that she had treated the guards like props in her social media production instead of respecting them as professional soldiers doing an important job. Her desire to create interesting content had made her blind to the cultural significance of what she was witnessing. The ceremony continued around them, but Sarah could no longer enjoy any of it. Every time she tried to focus on the guard's performance, She remembered her own embarrassing encounter and felt her cheeks burn with shame. The other tourists were having wonderful experiences while she was trapped in her own humiliation. Sarah noticed that several people were still taking photos of her, even though the main incident was over. She had become a tourist attraction herself, but not in the way she had hoped. Instead of being admired for her creativity and boldness, she was being treated like an example of what not to do in London. The worst part was thinking about how her followers would react when this story eventually made its way online. Sarah had built her social media presence by portraying herself as a savvy traveler who knew how to navigate different cultures and create amazing content. This incident would completely destroy that image. As the changing of the guard ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Sarah remained standing in the same spot, still processing what had happened. She felt lost and confused, unsure of what to do next or how to salvage anything positive from her London trip. The morning that had started with such excitement and anticipation had turned into a nightmare of embarrassment and regret. Sarah realized that her quest for the perfect social media content had led her to make one of the biggest mistakes of her life. Sarah spent the rest of that day hiding in her hotel room, trying to avoid thinking about what had happened at Buckingham Palace. She ordered room service for lunch and dinner because she was too embarrassed to face other people. Every time she closed her eyes, she could see Lance Corporal Wellington's emotionless face and feel the impact of his shoulder moving her out of the way. But while Sarah was trying to forget about her embarrassing encounter, the rest of the world was just discovering it. The videos that tourists had recorded of her incident were already making their way across the internet at lightning speed. The first video appeared on Twitter just 2 hours after the incident occurred. A tourist from Australia had posted a clear recording of the entire sequence, from Sarah stepping into the guard's path to her stumbling into the crowd. The caption read, "Tourist learns not to mess with the Queen's Guard the hard way." Within an hour, that video had been shared hundreds of times. People were adding their own comments and reactions, and the story was spreading to other social media platforms. Someone downloaded the video from Twitter and uploaded it to TikTok with trending hashtags about London tourism and royal guards. By evening, Sarah's embarrassing moment was being discussed on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and dozens of other platforms she had never even heard of. Each platform had its own version of the story, with different captions and commentary from users around the world. The reactions were mixed and intense. Many people criticized Sarah for being disrespectful and ignorant of British customs. They called her behavior entitled and stupid, saying that American tourists always think they can do whatever they want in other countries. Some comments were cruel and personal, attacking not just her actions but her appearance and intelligence. But other viewers defended Sarah, arguing that she was just a young woman who made an innocent mistake. They pointed out that the incident was embarrassing enough without people being mean about it online. Some travelers shared their own stories about cultural misunderstandings they had experienced in foreign countries. The videos sparked larger discussions about tourist behavior, cultural respect, and social media influence. Travel bloggers and cultural experts weighed in with their opinions about what Sarah had done wrong and what other tourists could learn from her mistake. News websites began picking up the story and adding their own analysis. Headlines like "American Tourist Gets Reality Check from British Guard" and "Social Media Influencer's London Trip Goes Wrong" appeared on travel and entertainment sites around the world. Sarah had no idea that her incident was becoming international news until her phone started buzzing with notifications. Friends and family members from back home in Los Angeles were sending her links to the various videos and articles. Her own social media accounts were flooded with comments from strangers who had seen the footage. The attention was overwhelming and mostly negative. Sarah's Instagram followers increased dramatically, but most of the new followers were people who wanted to make fun of her or criticize her behavior. Her previous travel posts were flooded with sarcastic comments about respecting local customs and understanding cultural differences. Sarah tried to delete some of the mean comments, but new ones appeared faster than she could remove them. She considered making her accounts private, But she knew that would not stop the videos of her incident from spreading. Those videos belonged to other people now, and she had no control over how they were shared or discussed. The worst part was seeing how the story was being twisted and exaggerated as it spread. Some versions made it sound like she had attacked the guard or tried to steal his hat. Others claimed she was drunk or mentally unstable. The truth of what actually happened was getting lost in all the rumors and speculation. Sarah realized that her 15 minutes of fame had arrived, but not in the way she had ever wanted. Instead of being known for her travel content or photography skills, she was becoming famous for making a cultural mistake that embarrassed her in front of the world. As she lay in her hotel bed that night, scrolling through endless comments and reactions to her incident, Sarah understood that her life had changed forever. The internet never forgets, and her embarrassing encounter with the Queen's Guard would follow her for years to come. She had wanted to create viral content, and she had succeeded beyond her wildest dreams. But sometimes getting what you want turns out to be the worst thing that could happen to you. 3 weeks after her embarrassing encounter at Buckingham Palace, Sarah was back home in Los Angeles, but her life had changed completely. The viral videos of her incident with Lance Corporal Wellington had been viewed millions of times across different platforms. Her story had become a cautionary tale that travel bloggers and cultural educators used to teach others about respecting local customs. Sarah spent those weeks doing a lot of thinking about what had happened and why. She realized that her obsession with creating perfect social media content had made her lose sight of what traveling should really be about. Instead of experiencing and appreciating British culture, she had treated it like a backdrop for her personal brand. The negative comments and criticism had been painful, but they had also forced Sarah to confront some uncomfortable truths about her behavior. She began to understand that her actions at Buckingham Palace had been selfish and disrespectful, even though that was not her intention. Sarah decided that she needed to take responsibility for her mistake and try to turn the situation into something positive. She spent several days writing a sincere apology that she planned to post on all her social media accounts. The apology was honest and thoughtful, acknowledging her errors without making excuses. In her post, Sarah explained that she had learned an important lesson about the difference between being a tourist and being a traveler. Tourists, she wrote, often treat foreign places like theme parks designed for their entertainment. Travelers, on the other hand, approach new cultures with respect and curiosity, trying to understand rather than exploit. Sarah admitted that her desire to create unique content had made her behave like the worst kind of tourist. She had seen the Queen's Guards as props in her social media production instead of recognizing them as real people doing an important job. Her quest for likes and followers had blinded her to the cultural significance of what she was witnessing. The response to Sarah's apology was mixed, but generally more positive than the initial reactions to her incident. Many people appreciated her honesty and willingness to admit her mistakes. Some former critics said they respected her for taking responsibility instead of making excuses or blaming others. Travel bloggers and influencers began sharing Sarah's apology as an example of how to handle public mistakes with grace and maturity. Her honest reflection on her behavior sparked discussions about the responsibility that social media influencers have when they travel and share their experiences with large audiences. Sarah also used her experience to educate her followers about British royal traditions and the role of the Queen's Guards. She researched the history of the ceremonial duties and shared information about why these traditions are important to British culture. Her posts became educational rather than just entertaining. The incident had cost Sarah some sponsorship deals and collaboration opportunities, but it had also taught her valuable lessons about authenticity and cultural sensitivity. She began creating content that focused more on learning about different cultures rather than just getting the perfect shot for social media. Meanwhile, Lance Corporal Wellington continued his duties as a Queen's Guard, probably unaware that his professional handling of the situation had made him a minor internet celebrity. Videos of his firm but appropriate response to Sarah's interference were being used in military training programs as examples of how to maintain discipline while dealing with civilian interference. The incident had become a teaching moment for tourists around the world. Travel guides and cultural orientation programs began using Sarah's story to illustrate the importance of researching local customs before visiting foreign countries. Her mistake had become a valuable lesson for others. 6 months later, Sarah returned to London for a second visit. This time, she approached the trip with a completely different attitude. She spent hours researching British history and culture before her arrival. She visited museums and historical sites with a genuine desire to learn rather than just to create content. When Sarah visited Buckingham Palace again, she stood respectfully behind the barriers with the other tourists and watched the changing of the guard ceremony with appreciation for its cultural significance. She took a few simple photos, but her main focus was on understanding and experiencing the tradition rather than creating viral content. As she watched the guards march in their perfect formation, Sarah felt a sense of gratitude for the lesson they had taught her. Her embarrassing encounter had been painful, but it had ultimately made her a better traveler and a more thoughtful person. Sometimes the most valuable lessons come from our biggest mistakes.